was in the previous panel. I agree, that's very, very important. Business may be similar, but the cultural businesses, there are differences, but the cultural differences are extremely different from one place in Africa to the next.
Good afternoon. My name is Wassup. I'm originally from Ethiopia. Now I live in Tacoma Park, Maryland. Today, first and foremost, I'd like to thank StartUpAfrica for organizing such an event. It's wonderful. Today I'm going to be talking about a small business that my wife and I, who's sitting in the audience, and my kids actually, started. What we're trying to do is not to do business, American business in Africa. We're trying to expand African business in America. So it's a whole different ballgame. It's completely neglected, and Africans have been marginalized from the market. Our resources from Africa is bought for dirt cheap and sold. We, living in America, buy it at a higher price. That kind of offended me initially, but it turned into an opportunity. But quickly, let me tell you, my background was not business. I was aspiring film teller. I was aspiring storyteller. I studied film and communication. Because I left at the early age. I left Ethiopia a long time ago at the early age and lived in about 8 countries. And I saw how the African story was not told right. The African narrative was a very thin narrative. And I wanted to recorrect that. I wanted to tell the African story, and I studied communication, but I ended up in the coffee growing region because of the global coffee crisis. But what inspired me is I went to Ethiopia, the coffee growing, the coffee is the birthplace of coffee. This place is so beautiful, lavish, and Garden of Eden. Blue sky, green vegetation, and red fertile soil. And the people work from sunrise to sundown. I've never seen anybody work as hard as they do. I know the American farmer, I know the European farmer, but what the African farmer does from sunrise to sundown is amazing. But in return, they get so little for the level of the land. And from a communicator, I turned into an economist, and I asked, how can people live in such a fertile place, work so hard, and cannot afford to pay for their basic existence? And I looked at it, I followed the money, and I was offended by the viciousness of the international market system that locks hardworking Africans in poverty. A small farmer in Africa who does 90% of the work to produce this beautiful, lavish beverage that we all enjoy, only gets 1% of the price we pay on this end. That is offensive. And those who do 10% of work on this side get 90% of the work. Starbucks made $20 billion a year. And the only thing they can justify in the value chain is marketing and running a fancy store with a fancy logo. And that offended me initially, but my wife and I say we shouldn't be offended. We should not curse the darkness. We should light the candle, and started a little company called Blessed Coffee that aspires to give the farmers investment opportunity as well as profit sharing. We're 3 years into the development. God willing, in 5 years, in 3, 4, 5 years from now, we're going to do an African cottage coffee shop in Tacoma Park that will be duplicated in every other city. God willing, 7, 8 years from now, and you're near a city, you will see Blessed Coffee that brings African coffee in partnership with the farmers. I'm going to tell that story with you today. Thank you.
Inspirational. That's stuff to follow. I'm your moderator, John Curry, and Erastus had asked. I work out of the Delaware Mid-Atlantic region as a technology commercializer. You can read about me in your panel. And I'm an entrepreneur and investor. I work at the early stages with scientists, inventors, commercializing their technologies, forming companies, and taking it to finding the first cash. And so I work also as an educator. Dan Freeman, who will be here later, is the professor at UD, the Horn Entrepreneurship Program Director. That's how I learned Lean, teaching with him for 2 years, and it was a transformative experience on how to, I'll say, do business development very, very differently and accurately. And so I learned a lot through that experience, and I told Dan I'll help out, but I want to go develop ventures, companies, now that I know the process to do it. So I'm hoping to share some stories with you all. So let me just say a few words about if you haven't heard of a lean startup movement and you're an entrepreneur, you definitely need to know about it. It's been sweeping the U.S. in the past 5 years, 6 years. It came out of Silicon Valley, where you would expect. And the reason is these, primarily Steve Blank, and he had a student, Eric Rees, wrote books. But what they found, and they're both entrepreneurs, Steve Blank is a 6-7-time entrepreneur. So these entrepreneurs looked at the process, studied thousands, and said, why do some make it? Why do many others not make it? And kind of the punchline is, it's all about customers, not investors. It's all about customers. So, but what Steve did was break it down. They both broke down the process and documented. Too many corporate tools are out there. Startup founders need different tools. And they started documenting and putting down very specific step-by-step processes of what to do to increase your chances, because still the 20%, a small number succeed, even with what you do. So that's kind of the background. It's about raising customers before you raise capital. It's about validating your assumptions. What are your assumptions? And so we'll talk a little bit about this. So I guess I want to ask our panelists, from raise customers, talk about your first initial customer assumption. Well, who was the first customer assumption that you thought you'd go after? Not the one that you're having success with now. Go ahead.
Well, I won't be speaking about my business here, but I'll be speaking about some of the clients that I've had who have started businesses in Africa. First off, I'm going to talk a little bit about Eric Sede. He is a Cameroonian from the Douala side. He has been here in the United States for over 20 years. He has a doctor's degree in pharmacology. He's been a pharmacist here in the U.S., and he has started Global Bridge Pharmaceuticals to export pharmaceutical products from here in the United States to Africa. He has a real passion for this because when he was just a young boy and still living in the Cameroons, his father died of diabetes simply because he could not get a constant supply of insulin. It was there sometimes and then not there other times. That's what drove him to study pharmacology and to come here and now to start this business. He originally thought that he would look for wholesalers in Kenya and Ethiopia and Nigeria and Cameroon, or distributors who he could sell large quantities of medications to, and then they would distribute them because they already had their networks. Part of the problem with that was local government regulations, and also these wholesalers and distributors already had their suppliers. They weren't aggressively looking for some new suppliers for their products. In fact, some of them had contracts that said they could not get medications from other places. The regulations in Ethiopia to bring new medicines in are almost insurmountable. He found it very, very difficult. But while he was talking to wholesalers and distributors, the names of different Africans of the diaspora living in the United States and in Europe kept coming up, and he would contact them, see who they knew back in the home country who might be distributors, and he began to listen to their own problems with getting medicines to their family members back in Africa. Part of the problems that they had would be that the medications that are available there in some places were fraudulent. They were not real medications at all. Some of them were not even available in the particular countries that people's families were at. Also, he found that many diasporans told him that they would send money to a family member when they needed the medications, but some other emergency would come up and they would use that money for something else. And so now he has developed his business. Customers are now Africans of the diaspora who want to send medications back to their family members and loved ones, and he makes sure they get the medications themselves. And if you're interested, I have some brochures about his company, of which I'm part of as well. So it changed from large quantities to wholesalers and distributors to now individuals, but it was a niche that nobody else was filling.
Customer, who's the customer? Before I answer that, I have to be honest with you. I was new. Lean Startup was exposed to me because of my conversation with John, and I found it amazingly helpful. But as I said, I was not a businessman. I was a social activist first, and got into business, and I grew up in that social business in a very confabulated and organic way. Now looking back, I wish I had this guidance at my disposal to shape my path. I'm not a businessman. I'm a social activist who's using business to advance social agendas. Before I tell you about my customer, let me quickly redefine. My business is a bit unique. We took the fair trade model. I was offended by the commodity market and encouraged by the fair trade model, and took the fair trade to the next level. We changed the fair to virtuous and changed the trade to an exchange. We changed the fair to virtuous because we want the business relationship to be mutually beneficial to both. In this case, the producer, the farmer, and the consumer. We're trying to connect the producer, the farmer, small farmer, with my neighbor next door, with the consumer, eliminating about 9 to 8 middlemen. And then we wanted that business transaction to be fair, and then we wanted that business transaction to be more than a commodity, because coffee is more than a commodity. There's human story on both sides. So what we created is a new business we called virtuous exchange, and we became a facilitator in that transaction, as opposed to the broker in the old model. So defining that, my customer is not necessarily the commodity consumer. My customer is the person who is using his purchasing power to get into a transaction that brings him commodity as well as exchange, holistic exchange. So in this case, my customers are both coming to my space with needs and goods, and I facilitate that transaction. So on this end, I have business communities who want not only commodity, who want to make a difference with their soul. People who are really offended as a result of the world global crisis 2008, offended by the existing business model that's driven by profit at the expense, at the risk of eliminating humanity. So my product is not necessarily coffee. My product is power, empowering people to use their purchasing power to advance and sustain a sustainable business transaction. So if we narrow it down, I live in a place called Tacoma Park, a very liberal and progressive community, and they were fascinated by the story and by the transaction. So I cultivated my social capital, used that space to create, of course, I bring to the table the finest, ultra premium, single origin, organic coffee from the mother place. You should try it. So, place and coffee, I swear to God. It is, in fact, we have a weather. If you touch my coffee, that's it. You will define so my customer is not necessarily the coffee drinker, but those who want to make a difference, who want to change this world to a better place to all of us. Thank you.
Not a businessman.
Yeah, I know, right? That's what I'm about to say.
Just so to re-emphasize, this is right out of the textbook of what Steve Blank says. A startup is a temporary organization. And the first part of that box is called customer searching. You're searching for a business model, you're searching for customers, and you're really searching for which segment is the right segment, the most profit, and how do you take your first dollars. That's what you're searching, and that's what the startup team has to figure out. And then when you graduate from customer validation, that means you've taken some bucks, you've made a couple of bucks, and you say, we're ready to scale. We can actually make some money doing this. And so that searching process is the beginning part. It usually takes a year or two. And so I want to ask the panel again, going back through that journey, if you can just restate, how long did it take from concept to, oh, we started this customer, then did this customer, then pivoted? If you could just kind of restate some of what we thought and how we pivoted.
And without knowing, like I say, now looking back, it's amazing. My wife and I, who's the co-founder of my company and the chief of mission, by the way, my title is co-founder and chief storyteller, so I'll keep you entertained. We took a 5-year plan to develop the model. And we wanted to tell the idea first, bring people on board before we venture out and took a risk, because it's a social business. The first time I opened my mouth, the VC said to me, you're mixing oil and water, business and social development as a mix. So we were also evolving with the idea. So we said, let's just sell farmers market, community organizations, festivals, have one conversation with a cup, and bring our social capital to play and prove the idea. So we took 3 years. Now for the very first time we're feeling good. We have massive social capital, community support, serious policy endorsement, an amazing media interest because we are a business for profit as well as public good. We're very new in this equation. Actually, we're the second nation's benefit corporation. Benefit corporation is, you should look into it, a new sort of business who come into play to use business to produce profit as well as public good. So we're a new entity. So now looking back, looking at this matrix, what we did is before a lot of people wanted to invest in our business, we said to them, wait, let's prove it first. Now we feel mighty good. We're going to open our retail roasting plant and a little cafe that will grow to an African cottage. And we've already proven our value and our aggressive community-based marketing. So looking back, without even knowing it, we were taking, I guess that's a business instinct. Especially when you have friends who want to invest in your business, you have to make sure that you've done your homework very, very well. So it took 3 years in short, and it took a lot of conversation, a lot of Ethiopian coffee ceremonies, a lot of community engagement, a lot of volunteerism, a lot of giving back to our community to prove our relevance and significance.
Speak a little bit more about Global Bridge. As I said, when he first started out, he was looking for wholesalers and distributors. To be able to break into that market through the wholesalers and distributors, Eric would have to be paying large entry fees to get in to register the medications. It could be as much as $10,000. If he could not get somebody to warehouse his stuff, he would have to put up his own warehouse before he could even start to distribute anything. A lot of money into it. With these lean startup principles, with the concentration in the beginning on the customers, it is not very monetarily intensive, but it is a matter of connecting with the potential customers, talking to them, what do they need? So he was able to enter the market much quicker and less expensively once he found out that his clients were probably going to be people of the diaspora living around the world. We spent 8 months, he and I both, doing research about wholesalers and distributors. When finally he was listening and heard about diasporans who were looking for ways of getting medications to their relatives back home, within 1 month he was shipping products. So this customer discovery is the most important part of it. People ask about investment money. They want to have finances. They ask me that all the time. It comes up within the first 5 minutes of any discussion I have with a new client. How many of you watch Shark Tank? Yeah, that's right. You know, those guys are not going to give money to anybody based upon an idea. You know, they've got to have some type of proven revenue stream first. You know, Eric said they might find out down the line that people who have a passion for Africans who may not be of the diaspora, they are in their church, they made a connection with somebody in Ethiopia, their children are sick, how do we get their medications instead of sending money? Global Bridge can send the actual medication to. There's other markets he's going to find, but he starts out small and builds upon that.
Great comments. And so, graduating from the two bubbles of customer search and customer discovery, and then validation is repeatable. It's about what's called product market fit. Right. So, the product, coffee, the right drug, for what segment? That's the validation that has to occur during that process. And it's a two-step process. The first step is what's the problem you're solving? And it's very difficult. What I've learned is a lot of, particularly technologists and product people, have an idea, a technology idea, and they approach it with, I've got the greatest idea, it's a technology. And the first step is a problem. The second step is a solution to a problem. And if I could tell you, I have worked on 20 different technologies in search of a problem, and they don't work. It doesn't work. It's very painful. Having a problem or recognizing some kind of an opportunity is what this methodology is all about. Start with the problem, validate a problem, then you have a solution, and that's called product market fit. And I think before we move on, I want to ask the audience, because we're going to talk about tools, we're going to talk about scaling and investment and some other things. Are there any questions for the panel members about product market fit or customers, the first step of finding customers? Yes, Matt.
Yeah, John, I think it would be helpful for me if you're explaining what Lean Startup is. I often understand Lean Startup more when I understand what it's not, like what business would look like if we started it in a way that was not Lean Startup.
Okay, so
can you sort of give us an example, or maybe these guys can give examples of businesses that would start, how you would do things differently if it's Lean Startup, if it's not Lean Startup?
I'll take the first cut, and then it's a great question, Matt. And by the way, I have to say, when I heard Matt's story, I tried to recruit him for my panel. It's exactly, raising customers, testing, which segments, that is the process. So what Lean Startup is not, it's the old way of, hey, let's have the co-founders go into a room for 3 months and write a business plan. Put that document that has lots and lots and lots of market research, lots and lots and lots of assumptions about how this multi-billion-dollar business is going to be so fantastic, and we are going to get 2% of that market. All the assumptions, what the world has found, and pros have found, all the assumptions go awry. And so what you have to go do when you test. You call it assumption, and we'll actually show that the tool that you work with is not a business plan, it's this tool. And this is kind of what changes every day, changes perhaps hourly, if you will. So that's my answer to Matt's question of what it's not. I'll let Rich and Bob go.
That's amazing. I have to be honest with you, I'm a rebel. I don't believe in rules. When I first got into my business, the 3 important people who influenced me are Mandela, Bob Marley, and Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs one time said, in anything that you know in life, any rule that you find, any formula, any idea is created by somebody who is less smart or more smart or equally smart like you. So you can change it. You can, in fact, when innovation comes out of thinking out of the box. By the way, not even next to the box. In fact, sometimes to be in the box is a privilege. And so my angle was from a very rebellious perspective. I'm going to create it my own. It was a need-based. I didn't pay attention to any formula, predefined notions to arrest my thinking and creativity. But after saying that, when I was exposed to this Lean Startup, I'm like, wow, it would have been a good point of reference to me, because I see myself in a very confabulated way following that logic. So I guess everything has to be the best of every world. Being creative and bold and driven by the reality of your own situation is important, as much important as finding this lean startup. But looking back now, I see it could have helped me in my own ways.
I guess to me the biggest difference between the more traditional way of starting a business, full-blown with a business plan, and lean startup is that lean startup is disruptive in nature. It allows more people to envision themselves as entrepreneurs than those that envision having to have a big business plan, put a lot of money into it, and look out right in the very beginning for investors. There are many, many success stories of young men and young women in Africa who were born and raised, or still in the midst of being raised, in mud huts in rural villages, who have made some big businesses simply because they paid attention to what people were saying, what problems they were having, and they looked for a solution. To start off a business with a business plan, there is the assumption that you know the product that you're going to sell and that you know who the customer is. And I guess I would contend in 2014, anywhere in the world, you don't know what you're going to end up selling, and you don't know who the customer is. So starting out validating who the customer is works towards what we call in the nonprofit world sustainability, what the part of the subtitle of this conference. You prove the sustainability right up front. There are people who are going to buy this from you. And it's probably a product that you didn't start out to market.
You know, initially, a quick note, when we wanted to create a sustainability and long-term longevity of our business plan, what we did was we gave every stakeholder in that transaction equal access to the investment and benefit sharing. So by design, all the stakeholders we're inviting are going to benefit from that system very, very equitably, as well as my neighbors who are investing a little money and the farmers who are investing. So by that design, we made sure that everybody will watch out for that system. So sustainability is our own unique business model.
Great comment.
Can I have one more thing since you got that up there? I would say in the canvases that I've seen this one before. I've seen another one that where partners are at, the only change is it says problem. And that's very important as an entrepreneur to have an ear wherever you're at in a local coffee shop, on the bus, in a meeting like this. What are people talking about as a problem they have? Yeah? You want to hear the problems first and then develop solutions for the problems.
Yes.
Just one quick question. I'm loving this. Are we getting any of this to the younger people? Because critical thinking just doesn't exist anymore.
The question, are we getting any of this to the younger people?
Yeah,
so
that's important.
It's a great question. So I will say, I mean, this is when I say, at least in the U.S., this methodology has, in the startup world, has just gone viral. It's good. There's 300 maybe 250 accelerators, which is a program now that early stage companies are all vying to get into these accelerators.
250 accelerators?
In the U.S. And virtually all of them use a tool that's this or very similar. There's a couple of different formats, but they're all a one-page summary, these kind of boxes. You put your assumptions down and you start tackling from day one your riskiest assumption. That's what you do. You nail to figure out your riskiest assumptions. Yes?
So just not to get overly caught up in the lingo, but for companies that are not seeking funding, aren't we always just going through this model? Meaning that we have to evolve in terms of the only way to keep the lights on is to gain new customers, and the only way to kind of continue to sustain is get smarter and smarter about your business in terms of what problem you're solving. It seems as though this model that you're describing is companies that are positioning themselves for financing rather than the rest of non-financed ventures. It seems like that is the clear distinction between them, because what I find as an advisor is when it's wrapped up in not fancy speak, but in some kind of forbidding model, people are a little bit more reluctant to engage because they think it's something they can't attain. But it seems as though what you're describing is what most entrepreneurs have to do to survive.
Right, and just to distinguish the startup, from the zero to something, as opposed to maybe 5 years in, you've taken revenue, so it's different. But
Startup in early stage.
That's one answer. I think. Well, I'll let the panelists also answer some of that.
Yeah, I tend to have mixed feeling. To me, this is the semantics that helps you think. What is important is the fire in your belly, your desire to, the entrepreneurship spirit, the passion, like Steve Jobs had, or even Howard Schultz for that matter. Okay, so and then the opportunity you identify, and then you have to wrestle with it, and you need to have this kind of thinking to help you think through it. But if this is your guide, you'll get lost. This is a means, not the end. It's not even at the beginning. I read books, I looked at models, and I created my own from my own reality. But looking back, I wish I had this on the side. It's good to be out of the box, but you have to know what's in the box. The box doesn't define you. That the box should be a tool of thinking, because somebody spent a lot of energy into that. Sat down, came. So it has to be a combination of the two.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right in the term that you used. Most of them, and I would add the word successful entrepreneurs use this. In fact, that's how Steve Blank came up with it. I mean, they observed what successful entrepreneurs were doing. But there are many would-be entrepreneurs. And since I help advise and consult with people wanting to go to Africa, I want to see more and more people start business in Africa. And for every non-successful attempt, there will be 100 more who won't even try because they've heard about that disaster. And so I want to see people make it. So it's a big deal to me to put these lean principles out there and see people look for customers in the very beginning. And I guess I would say another real clue to it is looking to the masses and what do they want and what are the problems that they have. An example is, new car dealerships have been in Africa for decades, and only the wealthy were driving cars, or they were buying cars to use them in business so they could make a profit off the car. Otherwise, they couldn't afford to do it unless there was some payback on that investment. But the masses also wanted cars, but they couldn't afford them. Then a few Africans in the diaspora would go and visit Europe, go and visit the United States. They buy a used car for themselves. They're cheap here. And they'd ship it back over. Their friends saw them doing that. And they'd ask them, next time you go, get me one. And people began now to develop businesses. We've got this huge duty-free part of Cotonou in Benin that has over 20,000 used vehicles. And now you see vehicles all over West Africa that are used vehicles that the masses are now doing. That's what happened with telephones and now the cell phones. People can afford them when it finally broke through. Another part of that, though, is price is king, here and over in Africa. If you can sell it cheaper, you'll get the customers. It's a big deal. We can talk about quality till we're blue in the face, but the only people who can pay for quality are the top 5–10%. The rest just want that thing. So how can you get it to them at a cheaper price? You can't give them a brand new Mercedes for $5,000, but you can give them a set of wheels to drive down the road. Okay.
I would like to say one more comment to that question about it's a stage of company. Entrepreneurs know it takes capital to get companies going usually, and most entrepreneurs say, I want to raise money. I need to raise money. The point is, you really cannot raise money until you have evidence, true evidence that you are an entrepreneur. You do know who your customer is. You have figured out how to take some money. And VCs, money people, want to put rocket fuel into the jet. And a lot of companies will never get there. And that's the reality of the game. So it's sort of this company stage. There's a lot of I don't want to call them lifestyle companies, but they're just maybe not making enough money for what money people demand. So, now, we have room for one more question. Okay.
How do you predict sustainability?
How do you predict sustainability?
Do we have time for closing remark?
And a closing remark. Sorry,
Is this going to be the closing remark? So, do we have time?
If this is the same as your closing remark, yes.
Yes, because today I came to tell you one thing, which is I'm about to say. The only thing that I want to share, I'm going to answer your question within that context. The only thing I'd like to share with you today are two things. But first, as an African diaspora, you need to dream an African dream in America. Because by definition, you know, when an American goes to Africa, he dreams an American dream in Africa. He takes the American dream of making it. So that's a different perspective. Because the minute you think like that, because American dream is, I'm not an American. There's a lot of privileges and exercises and expertise and positioning that will work against me. But if I position myself as an African and dream an American, a land of opportunity, a land where dreams come true. So thinking as an African or living an African dream in America is a first perspective that changes your. If you think like that, because you know my investors are. My investors are for the final model that I need $5 million for the final cottage model I will duplicate in every city. You know where that money is going to come? My partners are 254,000 small coffee farmers dwelling in the southern part of Ethiopia who are saving $10 per farmer to put up $2.5 million. That's creative thinking. Because they're going to get 50% of my venture. They're going to get 50% of the profit. So they 254,000 small coffee farmers. So I'm trying to implement an African dream in America because America is a land of opportunity. There is no country like America in this world. Okay, that is what I would say. So sustainability is coming. To me, sustainability, because I'm a social business. If I come to you, if you're my customer and I worry for your best, I take care of your need, I dream and care about you, and if you know that, your relationship with me will be a long-term relationship. So sustainability can only be maintained if the business transaction, the business space, addresses the need of everyone involved. If everybody in the transaction benefits from it, there's sustainability. But the old model where you buy cheap and you save high, and you're driven by the profit model, will at one moment will break.
I guess my answer to that would also be I'll get my closing remark into it as well, is that you prove sustainability when you start the scale. We've also been talking here about discovering customers. That's essential at the beginning. But as you now begin to widen your distribution network, if it begins to expand, then you can predict that it's going to be sustainable. I want to say to all of you here in this room, I was a missionary. That's what I did for most of my life. Did a lot of nonprofit work, helped set up a clinic and a secondary school in Benin. But there just weren't sustainable. I've seen a lot of these, and I don't want to talk down about them, a lot of these microfinance projects who help the mama sell more bananas. But that's not going to be the salvation or the development of Africa. They need jobs. And if you will dream and work through this lean principles to start a business that actually creates more jobs and new sources of income that weren't there before, changes will happen. And they're already happening. Africa is not developing in 2014 based upon international aid or small projects. It is business, and for-profit business. There is no shame in making money at what you're doing because you're creating jobs for people.
Well said.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Let's give them a round of applause, please.
At this point, we're going to prepare for our next panel, which is on youth. And the moderator